See already. I'm sorry. Happy New Year. Are you all ready to forge ahead into a new year? 2018. So Denise, would you please call the roll?
Witzel,
Here.
Tim,
Yes.
O'Halloran, Co-Johns,
Here.
Ricky,
Here.
Nichols,
Here.
McPherson,
Here.
Wise,
Here.
and Commissioner Bloomstead.
Present.
7 present, 1 absent.
All right, will you please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted on the east wall of this room on the south side of the door. Live web streaming will be available through the State Board of Education website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Please remember to turn your microphones on before speaking, turn them off when you are finished speaking, and please turn your cell phones off, and we ask that of the audience too. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the December 7th and 8th, 2017 State Board of Education meeting?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. The motion was made by John and seconded by Rachel. Is there any discussion? Denise, your votes, please.
Wise,
Yes.
McPherson,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Ricky,
Yes.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
O'Halloran, Tim,
Yes.
Witzel.
Yes.
7 yes, 1 absent.
Thanks. Commissioner, are there any recommended changes for today's agenda?
No, I don't believe I have any, but thank you for kind of juggling this first of the year meeting, and I know it's a little different than what we normally do, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of take up the items on the agenda. I did want to point out, just because it's always, when we have a member absent, we knew Molly would be absent in advance, and I know we had someone else absent last month, and we always want to make note that that absence was already known and recognized, so thanks.
You're welcome. Is there a motion to approve today's agenda?
So moved.
Patsy? And?
Seconded.
Okay, Maureen, thank you. The motion was made by Patsy and seconded by Maureen. Is there any discussion? Okay, Denise, your votes, please.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
Ricky,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
McPherson,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
O'Halloran. 7 yes, 1 absent.
Thank you. We now move into our public comment period. This period of public comment is available for any person who wishes to address the State Board on subjects within its authority. Please note that the public comment should be on topics related to the State Board's constitutional and statutory authority. Thanks to the members of the public who have attended today. And we have one request for appearance, which will be a 10-minute presentation by Sharon Royers. Sharon, please come forward.
I'm not sure how this works. Would you like me to?
Just have it share,
Okay.
and the microphone should be on,
Okay.
so you don't, if there's a little red light on,
Okay.
and you should be set to go, and you will have 10 minutes. Thank
All
you for
right. Very
coming.
good. Thank you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak today. Appreciate it. Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Sharon Royers, and I'm a retired administrator with the Omaha Public Schools, as well as a board member for the Brain Injury Alliance of Nebraska, and sometimes referred to as Tim Royers' mom. Often, actually, anymore. That's who I am. I'm Tim's mom. I'm here to speak to you. I want to start by sharing my personal story about my brain injury that I got while at work as a principal at Indian Hill Elementary in Omaha. I was simply looking for a file on a new student, and a cabinet door had popped open above my head that I didn't realize, and I stood straight up into the cabinet door. and it jarred me, and I felt a little dazed, but I did not realize I had a concussion. I returned after hitting my head to my office and sat down at my computer, and I couldn't remember what I was doing. And I knew that was not normal, but still I didn't realize I had a concussion. I actually did go to the school nurse. I told her I felt confused. I hit my head pretty hard, and I had a sizable lump growing. She kind of examined me and said, I think you'll be fine, take some Advil. So I decided to just push through it. I would be fine. The next morning I got up and went for a run. I was a runner at the time. And when I was done with my run, my head was just throbbing. And I knew at that point that I had a concussion. But we talk about concussion like it's a common cold. We hear the word all the time. And I didn't realize the importance of seeking medical attention right away. I decided it was a Thursday. I could get through the rest of the work week and rest on the weekend. And that's what I did. And after resting all weekend, I felt much better, actually. Sleep helps with concussion. And I went to work Monday morning, again, thinking I'm going to be fine. And within an hour of just the stress of the job and trying to do what I do, the headache returned and confusion and fog in my mind. And at that point, I realized I needed to see a doctor. And I did. And after confirming that I had a concussion and being off work for about a week, resting, I was symptom-free. My doctor said, you may return to work, but you need to take it slowly, Sharon, and you need to take breaks. And in my mind, I went, she has no idea what it's like to be a principal. And I didn't say it out loud. And I thought, I'm symptom-free, so what's the problem here? I'm just going to go back to work. And I did full force. And I became very ill from doing so. I ended up off work for several weeks. I needed occupational and physical therapy to restore my balance, my ocular motor skills. I still have memory issues. All of this occurred over 3 years ago, and I still have symptoms from a mild concussion that was not managed properly. I did not follow my doctor's directions. And so now that I'm well enough to do something about it, I feel compelled to share my story as a warning to what can happen to our students in our schools that get concussions and that are not then managed properly. And what often happens, particularly with our high school students, is like me, they want to return to their life. They don't want to fall behind in their studies. They want to return to doing what they need to do. And so when you have a concussed brain, your decision-making, part of it, and it's your brain, your decision-making is kind of broken too. And so you need support from others to help you make decisions about what you should and should not be doing, taking breaks, etc. And so what I want to talk with you a little bit about then is the Concussion Awareness Law, that you have a handout hopefully in front of you. If you could take a look at that, in 2012, our state passed the Concussion Awareness Law, and that really was about athletes. And that was about protecting athletes. Coaches needed to be educated about concussion and make sure that they had signed permission from a medical professional before the student could return to play. But then in 2014, that law was amended for the return to learn. Now this covers more than athletes. It covers all students with concussions. And what's interesting, and you'll note this fact down where I define what I call the problem here, is that at least 1/3 of students with concussions in our schools, it has nothing to do with athletics, with our school athletics. It's car accidents. It's falling on the ice and hitting your head. It's life happens, we get injured, accidents. And so these students need to be protected as well. So if you look under about halfway down the handout I gave you, you'll see it says schools across Nebraska. This is me defining the problem. Schools across Nebraska are really inconsistently aware of this return to learn protocol that is required of them by law. According to a recent survey that the Nebraska Concussion Coalition sent out to all Nebraska athletic directors and schools, only 62.5% of schools had designated persons to assist students as they returned to the classroom. And only 70.5% of schools have made concussion training available to classroom teachers. And that's not training about diagnosing or recognizing what a concussion looks like. That's training about how do I accommodate the student who's trying to return to the classroom. It's tricky business. And each concussion is different. My doctor and my physical therapist all said, you've seen one concussion, you've seen one concussion. And that's the truth of the matter. And so how do schools support? Most schools appear to manage concussions through their athletic departments or possibly through the special ed department. Now, the problem with both of those are, A, if the child didn't get the concussion through athletics, then they're slipping through the cracks. And B, we're hoping that they don't need an IEP and special ed support. Concussions will resolve themselves typically within 10 days, 2 weeks, with support and proper management. We're looking at concussion management. Then the child can just return and be healed. That's our goal. Hopefully they won't need special ed services and IEP support. So special ed isn't necessarily the route either because of that fact. It really is about changing the culture of concussion and the whole community coming together. The child's parents, the student themselves need education about the support that they'll need. The medical providers communicating with the schools, and then the school staff understanding the nature of this and what is needed to support them. So really what we are asking in our call to action, if you look at that, we're asking the State Board of Ed to lead the way in developing a model policy which defines who should participate in schools' concussion management teams, which staff members specifically, and how students' progress and support will be monitored until they're symptom-free. The Nebraska Concussion Coalition can certainly help with this. And really, I'm here to say with my story, I've lost 3 years of my life from not understanding the nature of concussion. And so I don't want that to happen to any of our students. I'm aware of some students this has happened to in our state. It was concussions not managed. Now they're having seizures. Now they couldn't go on to university. They had to get extra support. These things happen. These are happening today in our state. And so what can we do to be proactive, to be ready to receive a student who has a concussion, no matter how they got the concussion? What can we do to have defined avenues to support them when they return to our classroom? And that's what we're asking and bringing that to your attention. Thank you. Yes, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Very, very informative. We will now move into our regular public comment. You'd think I'd listen to what I say. We will now move into our regular public comment period. I would like to remind you to please sign in, and I only have one card this morning for public comment. Mrs. Pinkerton, come forward, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Rachel Pinkerton, good morning. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm glad I made it. I was delayed by one of those wrecks, the one on 680 South. You missed that, I hope it was, but it was right in front. Glad to be here. I'm glad I didn't miss that last presentation. Very interesting. I've been talking to you every month about our culture and what I consider to be a symptom of the culture on the UNL campus, the incident that occurred on August 25th. In front of the Student Union. And I think I mentioned to you that I sent an email to some state senators, Senators Erdman, Halloran, and Brewer, on November 4th, thanking them for raising awareness about this incident, which I named my email Curing Malignant Leftism at UNL. And I consider this incident and what investigation of the incident uncovers a symptom of an issue that is an opportunity to improve our pursuit of excellence in academics. So that a symptom that the social justice warriors in the English department feel they can squelch conservative speech on the grounds of free speech, although they were trying to silence the voice of a 19-year-old conservative student. And then maybe more revealing and more concerning in the aftermath of that, the Nebraska chapter of the American Association of University Professors put out a letter that 315 current and former professors across the system in our state signed. And that is not a good look for that organization, because the letter was very sloppy. It did not display proper investigation or concern for the facts. Just for example, it talked about nonprofits ganging up essentially with the governor and senators to attack the university. And it even specifically talked about the staff of a nonprofit called School Choice Lincoln. Well, if I'm one of those professors who signed that letter, I'm pretty embarrassed at this point and angry that I was given a letter to sign. School Choice Lincoln is not a nonprofit. It doesn't have any staff. It wasn't working with the senators or the governor. It was just, it's very informal, grassroots parents concerned about options. Oh, and the letter also says they're anti-public education, and they're not. They have had kids in public school and are big supporters of public school. So, okay, so that's one symptom. And I submit that our ACT scores that are going down or flat is in part also a symptom of malignant leftism, of abandoning the facts and a preoccupation with political correctness. And just being in OPS, I have to look at all of the resources and the passion that was expanded on the comprehensive sexuality education. I look at also at the NEA and their 6 new business items pushing gender fluidity. So I think that's, again, an opportunity if we get more respect for viewpoint diversity, and that we can do better academically. And another symptom is the gap, which we're second in our state is second in the nation in our gap in educational attainment between whites and minorities. So again, but we have we're going to have a good year. How about here's our cure? We've got Frost talking about hard work and commitment to excellence and unity. So go Big Red. Thank you.
Microphone.
I'll stop and read the rules after I take a break. Let's take a short break. The State Board of Education will now come back into session, and we will move to item 5 with our overview and reports. And our first one is Commissioner Bloom, a report on the strategic plan discussion. Commissioner?
I'll try to get up here and see if we can. So I'll pull up this presentation. What first of all, again, thanks, and I know I sent you like a lot of extra reading materials. And the reality of the bulk of the work that we have, it really gave me this opportunity and chance to start talking about and how we actually get that reporting done. And I was already picked on them for the different fonts for the report. And actually, it's a fair point. And I'll kind of talk you through not just that, but kind of some of the reporting pieces that I want, because we need kind of multiple different ways of sharing this information, not just with you, but with the public. And I'll hope to talk through a little bit of that as well. But I also, I tied it, I think in your materials now on there is this report that actually starts with what I presented to you in December. I'm going to jump way forward on this to the kind of the additions and talking specifically about the annual report of the strategic plan as well. And so I'll dive down to that. I should have just, I think there's about 150 slides or something to that effect. Let me jump down this way. Well, it's probably not as funny as what happened to be. So I'll dive down here to where it says measuring progress, and this is kind of the beginning of that. And let me dive back out. Number 35 on it. So we left last time talking a little bit about the set of priorities and the work that had happened across the agency. I'll kind of really quickly highlight a little of that and then dive into really this notion of how we're measuring progress and what the elements of the strategic plan are. And I won't go through every element that you had in the written report, but I thought I'd highlight a few just from a conversation standpoint. And then I really do hope to have a conversation about, it's kind of the moving from the knowing something to doing something phase, right? It can't just be a so what. We actually have to talk about the dynamics of addressing achievement gaps and the dynamics of really making some of those metrics move. And there's some things I think within the report, when you take it holistically across all the board's plan and all the goals and the metrics that we looked at, moving some of those is going to take some real effort. And I think I'd written to you before, or mentioned to you before, that goals that we can accomplish ourselves aren't significantly big enough goals. I will tell you the board has outlined a set of goals that we can't accomplish ourselves. We're going to have to do that work, including conversations with partners, and just what we heard on the brain injury side of the equation is also among those things. And how do we leverage our efforts as a state board from a rulemaking standpoint to a policy standpoint to an agency standpoint? How do we actually pull all that together? So this is big, but I think it's big in an important way that we're taking on that responsibility because of the strategic plan, and I think that's critical, and so I think this is a moment in time that maybe a turning point for us as an agency, maybe a turning point for the state board, and hopefully a turning point for the success of students across the state of Nebraska. So first of all, just a couple little reminders. The strategic priorities, outcomes, and goals, this is essentially, or maybe I don't know if it's verbatim from the strategic plan, but close. We said to ourselves in that strategic vision and direction that we will regularly review these goals organized by strategic priorities and outcomes. And so part of the process of ensuring that we're doing that, I've got a couple ways that we can do that. But we also said we're going to track those, I think, using the board's committees and also using specifically the board strategic planning committee as among the ways that I propose that we do that. And I think that we've talked about over this last year that become important. And it's also important that we specifically said we're going to implement, monitor, and evaluate. And the board and commissioner shared the responsibility. That's how we wrote it into the plan, to champion and lead that strategic vision and direction, serve as the change agents and capacity builders, ensure progress on the strategic priorities. The board and commissioner will be responsible for implementing the strategic plan, monitoring on an annual basis, right? So our work together is very, very important to me, and that we're able to accomplish that work together. Obviously, the review presented on an annual basis, or as you direct, so it can certainly be more than an annual basis, and I actually will talk about how I propose that we do that more than annually. And then this notion of an objective external review that we talked about, that actually has to happen this year, and I want to talk a little bit with you about what that process looks like, and certainly engage with you about how you want that process to come together. But I think that's actually a unique element of our plan, and actually lends some thinking to how we do that, how we also do that together. Because I actually want someone to look at it from the outside and say, hey, look, you're missing this point, you're missing that point. We can sometimes get lost in our own sense of logic around something, and that doesn't always work as well. So our implementation timeline back reflective a little bit of what we did at a department level. January, and these are rough timelines, but January through April, we were gathering after the board passed the strategic plan in December of 2016. We were gathering and looking at all the different activities, and I shared with you before, it became fairly daunting for the staff. We looked at all of the work that was happening that could align with the strategic plan, and we have to start to be able to prioritize what work really matters in an agency. Sometimes prioritization also requires us to go, what types of things are we going to have to stop doing, or how do we get more efficient in processes? And we had some very, very deep conversations across the agency around those particular themes. In May, kind of May through August timeframe, we continue to talk about what those strategies and those outcomes, and what types of things, and what types of organizational structure, and what types of things will make a difference, at least from implementing those key activities that the board identified within the strategic plan, but also about making a real difference in the goal metrics that we had identified. And then really, I think those in the, call it the commissioners team, but those closest to me had to also come in and challenge me on what do you want to accomplish on occasion? How do you want this to, and we really had very intense conversations about how we got certain things done. Change, by the way, is hard. I think I've shared with you before, we have some of the posters of the various roles in my office hanging there is change agent, right? I'm trying to look at that, remind that that's what the board said, that's one of our roles, and in order to make a difference, I think we're going to have to be able to propose changes that make differences, not just even within the agency, but perhaps how the system interacts, how we work with others, how we engage stakeholders. A lot of different things that we have to accomplish to make a difference and move these metrics. And I think the examples I have will probably highlight that, I think, as we talk. The 2018 proposed timeline, and this is, I'm kind of thinking between the boards and the board's committees and the board as a whole, but in particular, really thinking about the strategic planning committee being the place in which we do some, at first I thought of quarterly reports, and quarterly doesn't maybe quite match with when data and stuff are available, and so this timeline could adjust or change with the strategic planning committee or you as a full board as you want, but at least what I propose, that right away in February we come back and look at all of the different elements in the strategic planning committee with a particular review of those things that we said, hey, look, by the end of 2018 we're going to get these things done, right? And so I'd like to be able to start that process with the committee. I will take questions, but I see Rachel maybe has one.
Yeah,
So.
and that's what I wanted to ask. Do you want questions
Yeah.
throughout, or do you
I-
want us to reference a slide and go back to that slide when there's a question about the slide?
Maybe let me get through a little bit and come back, because if you're feeling like you really got something, I don't mind. If
No,
you
I mean,
got
just
some.
if something comes up on a slide, would you rather have the question about it at that slide point in time? Or
Yeah,
wait until later? It's your call.
Actually,
make a note.
maybe if you ask me the question, I'll try to, if I can answer it quick and not.
The only question with this
disrupt you.
proposed timeline, is there a way that you can interface that with what's happening with AQuest in schools?
Yeah.
I think one of the
Yeah,
things
that's a great
where
point.
I have a little confusion yet is really the interface between ESSA, AQuest, and what we're doing with our strategic plan.
Yeah.
And so having a proposed timeline that shows the
That's, I think,
relationship
And
from
I think
my
that's a
view
great
or
point.
helpful for me.
Yeah,
But,
I think that's a great point, because even, I might be contemplating some of those things, but not describing them for you, and finding a way that we do that really well. Absolutely. So I'm not fixated on this plan or this timeline per se, if we could adjust for something else.
So I would just ask maybe in February, come back with
Yeah.
a proposed timeline that shows those
Those phase
interface
elements,
reporting
yeah.
pieces? Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
I'll be happy to do that. I think that makes great sense, so. And naturally, any of these things, this is kind of, I just, even without the timeline, some of these things I think become really important, this notion of those, and there's essentially 5 or 6 different goals that kind of sound like activities among the board goal, and I'll use one of those examples of setting the baseline for ACT, right? Well, that's important also for ESSA and also for AQuest and all of those fronts, so it's a great point. In August, I think, and maybe it could happen sooner based on conversations, but I want to, at least by August, to know who's going to come in and do the external review. And so if we start that even sooner, at least in the process of selecting that, I would, depending on what that needs to look like, and that's where I'd like to be able to talk through that with the board and the committee around what you want that to look like, to make sure we're hitting the mark on those fronts and have a good conversation on that. But that external review, you know, someone has to be able to dive into all of the different elements of things that are happening, and objectively be able to look at not just the moving of metrics, but also the different processes that are in place, and are those really functioning and working? And I think that's going to be important information for you, important information for me, and really important information for us to be able to be successful with the plan. So yeah.
Quick question.
Sure.
When we talk about this external review team, is this going to be a group of individuals or just 1 or 2?
So actually, I think it's undefined, is the way, it's just someone from the outside and not from within the department or within the board. And you know, those of you, I mean, I know Patrick, you talked about this quite a bit at that point in time. I think we need to talk about, make sure that it's the right thing for what we want to accomplish. So I'm not sure that one person can come in and do that well, but we also got to be a little cognizant of how we do that. We talked at the time, if you remember, that we hired an outside consultant, of trying to add that to the outside consultants' work. I don't know if that's the right approach or not, but something I think to consider.
Can I just
Yeah.
comment on that? OPS, when they did their strategic plan, had an outside firm come in and actually review it. I believe that that's what we need, an objective outside firm.
So Patrick, was that a team of people, kind of like an accreditation team coming into a school district?
You know, I think it's very much like the folks that came in and helped us put together our strategic plan. I think it's a professional organization that would bring in, you know, whatever they thought was appropriate to do the review.
And I think on this topic, it's going to be important that we come up with what we want to see in that external review. So that would guide if it's a request for proposal or whatever to do it, but being able to define what we want to see in that's going to be important.
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that point, because I think it's a detail I'm thinking about that's not spelled out in this timeline. But I think in order to do this well, an RFP would be necessary, probably as soon as March, or because in order to select someone by, give them enough time to actually come in and do that review, we're going to have to get that process started actually pretty quick. So does that help anyway?
One other quick, crazy question.
That's right. Those are the
Being a
easy
person who
ones.
has a hard time dealing with a budget, their own
Yeah.
budget, is there money in our budget to be able to handle a professional group from the outside coming in?
I'm going to use the "it depends." I think we tried to imagine that we need to reserve such funds to be able to do that, and so I think so. But again, if you remember that the responses to the RFP last time, it was a pretty broad set of costs, and I think we want to be cognizant about what those costs would be. So yeah.
We utilized some funding from the philanthropic community.
Yes.
Is that something we would look at again?
Yeah. And I haven't
a
reached back
request
out,
for
but I
some
think it would make
funding
some
from the philanthropic
sense
community to
on
help?
that front. And here's why I think that would make sense, because I also want to make sure that we're engaging stakeholders in that review, similar to the way that we started that process. And I think that would make sense to engage them, because they actually, I think they will be happy to be part of that in this sense, because they've invested in this plan, and they would like to see that progress reported. And there's so many things we can learn from that review. I don't even know what they are, that's when I can't even necessarily imagine what all those things are. But to me, that's a pretty exciting opportunity for us to go, here's what we've done. It feels like show and tell time, to take an elementary example. But I mean, in some ways, it's like, hey, look, it gives us a chance to show and tell a little bit of that, and take that critique and listen to things that we might be able to do better. So, yeah, sure. I guess that kind of hits that just generally in the time frame. Obviously, then we're trying to get into all of the other routines that this actually requires, and I know we have a kind of a few of those timelines. What I would imagine in next January, will be the beginning of the biennium budget cycle again. We'll have this fall where we're doing budget. I think this timing can work out really well, that every other year we're essentially doing a state of the schools type of report. What are the types of things we need in January? And so this gives us that chance to at least dive into that. But I really think by next January, after an external review, here's where we think we are, and here are other places we think we additionally need to go based on 2 years of experience within that plan. Kind of diving into the examples, and I use these two examples and I'll come back to them, but ACT baseline being one of those examples of something that was more of an activity that the board said, hey, look, we're going to have to go back and do that. And so obviously we've made progress in implementing the ACT. There's still a lot of work to do about how we analyze and use data to make that difference, and even getting the reporting timeframes and all that stuff down is important to that whole process. But the board has some work to do, I think, in setting baseline on this one. I also think the board, from a perspective of setting baseline and reviewing where we're at with baseline on other goal metrics as we've changed standards, as we think about that, the integration of that work with the ESSA work as well. So we have goals that have to come together, and so I use that as an example of one of those goals. And then we had the graduation goals, and not those are pretty solid metrics. We know what they mean, and we can observe that data across a lot of different things. And I think that's an example of one that's really a very tangible other type of metric that you identified. So, and you probably can't read this, and that's my apologies, but I just highlight this goal 3.3, which is the 7-year core graduation rate, and actually 3.2 I think was the four-year graduation example or goal. This only has two of you. Within the written report, you can see all of the various subgroups. I look at the overall, so when you look at the overall rate, and I think this is where I want to start to talk a little bit about achievement gap and where we're at, but on this particular, on graduation. So when I look at overall graduation rate, you might look at that and go, okay, so the board said we'll be greater than 95% by 2026, right? Well, right now, actually, I think the data got messed up in that. I'm so sorry. I just looked at it as I transferred it. I'm pretty sure, because I believe it's actually supposed to be, no, it's right. It's 93.42%. I couldn't read that, Rachel, just so you know that.
I'm looking for it on the report that you sent out.
Yeah.
Companion. I'm looking for the page on there so I can pull it up.
Yeah, there, sorry about, I'm going to also have to work with all my eyesight issues. So, but 93.42%, you kind of go, well, 95% doesn't seem impossible for us to accomplish at all, right? When you think of across the whole population, you say by 2026, well, I'm certain we can figure that out. So I took the subgroup of students that we report and identified the subgroup that was actually lowest in this case, and that happened to be our Native American students across the state, and it's 77%, and our goal says that by then that'd be 90%. And we can debate that later too, whether or not it ought to be the same as or other things. But what we wrote into the strategic plan was that And I'm going to tell you, in my work with Santee and our work with Santee and with other Native Americans, we can't accomplish that just by saying it'd be nice to have it there. We got some real work ahead of us. Our systems have to align that we're providing the support to make that difference. And if I was to pull out other subgroups of students in here too, that you would see that substantial challenge. So if it happened to be African American males that I'm looking at from a subgroup, what's our real strategies to accomplish that? And if you're not just a little bit scared by that, because I am, somebody gave me the title fearless leader the other day. No, I'm a fearful leader. I'm fearful that we can't accomplish the work that we've laid out in front of us if we don't get to work. And that means getting to work around equity issues and focusing our time and our attention in the places that need that support the most, which I think is what the ESSA plan is intended to do for us. But we don't get that done on our own. We don't get that done without some very intentional partnerships and strategic partnerships with others that are going to come to the table to help us get that work done. So that's just one example, and I'll dive into another one. Yeah.
And I think the graduation rate, I pulled it up so I could see it.
Yeah, I
So could
understand.
read it. I think this one for me, many were eye-opening as you put it in context of our strategic plan. That you really see a trend right now that's kind of flat or actually
Yeah.
rates have dropped.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, back to my point on the AQuest and ESSA, you know, I don't think we need to do annual classification, but I think we need to have robust annual reporting.
Yeah.
Because my question would be, if we don't have robust annual reporting, are we not keeping an eye annually at a school level on the detail as well?
Yeah.
And I worry that, I hope this isn't a trend, but because of the transition in reporting between No Child Left Behind and ESSA and where we are, is this indicative of, you know, maybe schools not paying as much attention in that short period of time? I don't know that because it's not necessarily significant, at least from my
Yeah.
quick look, but it clearly is flat
Yeah.
or a little behind. And so I do think it's important that we think about how reporting pieces come together so that we're really helping the schools shine a light on
Yeah. And
any changes in patterns that are happening at a school
Absolutely.
level.
And I think,
Or
you
district
know,
level.
when we sit and look at statewide data, just like this data, right, looking at all students versus subgroup level, you see different things when you start to look school by school. You see different things when you look at subgroup by subgroup. And that should inform our strategies and the type of work that we're going to do. But I think you're entirely right that annualized reporting, and again, this ties to the ESSA work as well. It's not just about classification. It's also not just about school improvement processes. It's about how people use data to inform decisions. And we have a lot of that work, in my view, to provide leadership at a state level. We've not provided that leadership in that way in the past. It's not been what has been built into the structures of the department, but that's what we're building. That's why I want a data research team driving these conversations and building these things. But and I'm excited to be able to show you one more thing at some point in the presentation that I think also starts to get at that point. Yeah, Patsy.
Speaking to what Rachel had to say, just one thing that she had to say, and that is the statement, are schools not paying attention? I think schools are very aware of statistical information like this. Perhaps maybe even before state school boards are. And the problem comes in the support and the leadership. They do need that support and that leadership to deal with statistical information, showing them where they need improvement.
Yeah, and I do think that at least in our lessons around priority schools and others, the places that tend to struggle, there might be lots of different reasons, but if you aren't doing that work at that local level, it's not happening. And what's our responsibility to, I can't provide support just by saying, oh, here's where you're at, right? The knowing something. Well, they have a legitimate gripe about the department. If they say, well, it's nice that you told us that, it's nice that you put that label on us, but how are you actually going to help us? And some places might say, I don't want any help from you, right? I mean, this is not an unusual concept, that happens, right? So how do we play that role? And we have to play all of those 5 roles that we've described so many times. We sometimes are the regulator, but sometimes a school might say, we know we have this problem. What's your solution? How do you help us along? And that's where we're going to have to continue to get better ourselves as an agency.
Not to reiterate what has already been said, but, we do have reason to fear our ability to make these goals. And we
Yeah.
can't do it
Yeah.
without being extremely proactive as a board.
Yeah.
And, the efforts need to be in those major gap areas where we've got to work, we've got to set goals, we've got to be able to actually make the 244 school districts across the state understand that, we are going to achieve this, and they need to be a partner, but, we're going to do whatever it takes to get the job done.
I think it's also interesting, and I'll talk a little bit later about some of the ESSA plan work, but it's also interesting, and this is how we balance those things. The one very good thing within ESSA, we have this notion of identifying schools for comprehensive support, right? The comprehensive support I view very similar to what we've tried, how do we scale up something similar to what we've done on priority schools? But there's also this targeted support, which is specific about, hey, look, it doesn't matter where they fall in the classification system, how are their subgroup populations doing? That targeted support is designed around improving those subgroups. And I actually think that's a really thoughtful part of what's in ESSA from a perspective of actually states helping districts improve. I think that's thoughtful. So.
Again, to be proactive, we've got to find a way to reach out those 85 needs improvement schools, and we're not doing that at this point in my mind.
Yeah, and I'll describe that around ESSA, because that's actually the point of our ESSA plan is actually to have the resources to be able to use that to structure it around those other schools. And we have a lot of conversations from the priority schools to other needs improvement schools. How do we actually make that move? And it's my challenge, because I actually feel that same kind of, I'll call urgency around how do we actually get out there, because if I've got one school that's facing this situation and another school that I know looks that way in data, and I just had a conversation last evening with a superintendent about that very issue. He'd been elsewhere, he came to this other school, he goes, I have the same challenges here as I had there, how can we strategize about making a difference in that school? And those were 2 different needs improvement situations, and it's a challenge.
Since we're on goals, my question is.
Microphone.
Sorry, it's
Long break. Will we be re-looking at some of these goals? There are a couple that I thought were a little unrealistic. 100% of students will be this by a certain time, and we're at a baseline of 21%. Are we going to be looking at tweaking any of these, or are these set in stone?
I think it maybe it's an it depends answer, but I think process-wise, we should look at all those goals and say, hey, look, I never want to be in a position where we're saying that our goal's too ambitious for us to accomplish. I mean, I'd rather have an ambitious goal and get 50% of the way there, and quote unquote miss the mark of that particular goal, but actually make substantial progress, than not have an ambition of 50% of the way there, or it's part of the way there, and only then make it half that way. You know what I mean? I like having ambitious goals, but I do think we have to balance that with, do we have a set of strategies that can accomplish that?
Right.
I mean, if that just doesn't exist in the world, then maybe those are the types of conversations we have around our strategies. So.
And I think that's where, as you think through those strategies and we start to continue this discussion, examples like the graduation rate becomes important when we think about the subgroup pieces as a part of it. So when I talk about schools paying attention, it's not so much from, focused on the school, but really focused on, are we thinking about how important different data points are, and what are the different things that are happening? The fact that Native Americans have dropped 6 percentage points in 3 years in their graduation rate doesn't necessarily say oh my gosh, what's happening in our Native American schools, I think we should know and have a better understanding of what's happening with Native American students across the state.
Absolutely.
Is that graduation rate, how does it differ between our Native American schools and our schools that are serving numbers of Native American students? What do we know about meeting the needs of our Native American students, and what are we doing in partnership with our schools to address those needs? The trajectory over 3 years is really not the direction we want to go. And I know this is a starting point, but I think that's the kind of discussion and awareness that we need to have as
Yeah.
the so
Because
what.
if we're gonna move that at all, it takes a different type of thinking. And so when you see plateaus,
That
here's
we
what
need to own a part of that thinking, yes, and
exactly.
responsibility.
And I think when we see plateaus, it means that others have accomplished in many ways what they're going to accomplish on their own without thinking like we're trying to think on this front, right? And so I can't have a school say, well, we just hit that plateau. Everyone hits that plateau, that's how it goes. We can't be in that position, I think, so.
Matt, I got a quick question for you in regards to, thank you very much for the metrics. This is really enlightening to see metrics almost for the first time in regards to what we're looking at, especially the subgroups. But in regards to what Rachel's talking about, is there any correlation with these metrics being involved with the EBAs under AQuest?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think the combination of how we use different data elements, obviously the ESSA plan has some of that conversation in it, but AQuest as a whole. And if you go back to what I'll call our theory of action around AQuest, we didn't think that just looking at one part of the data would actually help us improve, right? I think we've been very consistent in thinking that in order to really make differences, we're going to have to look at a lot of different things and probably look at those differently than certainly we have in the past, and most likely differently than schools have looked at those in the past. But you can't get to that point where we've done as good as we can do. That's not good enough for me. Good enough is not good enough, right? So, meaning I can't look across the state and see that we have those challenges by subgroup or with any one student anywhere for any reason that we aren't doing everything we possibly can. Are there limitations? Yes, sometimes. We have horrible things that can happen in a student's life or in a family's life. But even then, what are our relationships? I'm doing quite a bit of work right now in conversations with HHS and probation and the court system. Here we got a set of students. We had last year had LB, I think it was LB 511 that was introduced really at our asking. That spurred conversations about looking at what are the results of students that are in the care of the state from a state ward perspective or in probation. How are we doing that? And what's daunting, I guess, in that is there's so many different challenges. That's why I'm saying, hey, look, we have to provide that leadership. You are providing that leadership to say, this is what we want to go get done. Now we actually have to go get some of that work accomplished, and that's a challenge. But it's not an impossible challenge, and no matter what we do, I'm in the die trying moment, right? That's what I'm going to spend my career here doing is die trying to make sure that we made a difference on those fronts. So, sorry to get a little emotional on that. But.
I just want to add a piece, and it's not quite where this graduation rate example is, but I think it correlates with it. Since our last board meeting, I've had lots of conversations with many teachers that are newer teachers, in between teachers of several years, and very veteran teachers. And one of the things that really stood out to me that came out of those conversations was it wasn't about the standards. It wasn't about the testing. It wasn't about the curriculum. It was about the follow-through of discipline that they were not getting the resources for that were affecting the outcome of what was happening in their classrooms. And that all goes back to that leadership piece. What resources do they need when you've got young administrators or whether they're veteran? Do they really care? But when you have middle school teachers look at you and say, there's such apathy in my classes, in my science classes. And he goes, I have good kids, but the apathy is there. And he goes, I can see it between the difference of between the free and reduced lunch, poverty, and those that, because in their school district, or in that particular school, they have all of those levels. And he said, how do you change, he asked me the question, Maureen, how do you change that apathy before they go on to high school? And he said, I am just really frustrated. And he goes, we really have a great science department here, but these kids just don't care. And so I just go back to that resource piece and wondering, how can we align our rates better?
Well, and I'll try to I'll go ahead and move this absenteeism slide, for instance, and I think it's a good opportunity. We have to make sure that we're engaging families and parents and students, and it's not as easy as just finding one metric that answers all of those different things, but we've added chronic absenteeism to the to our workload relative to the ESSA plan, relative to how we're going to design AQuest, right? So and by the way, I was a bit scared by this number, so so I looked at this and I went, oh, absentee, we were doing a pretty good job going maybe kind of the right direction, and it suddenly kind of come right back. Mm-hmm. And in all the conversations, and we had the Council on Student Attendance, and we've had the laws passed that were trying to ensure that we're addressing this. Again, my theory is we have to engage students, and students have to be engaged, and parents have to be engaged, and families, and others are, at least in those places where if we're running into, if you want to call it, if they're seeing apathy, but there's challenges that are I don't know how to describe this, I guess, but perhaps our challenges are growing and our solutions are narrowing, right? We need to be more thoughtful about how we're addressing all those different challenges.
One of the things that's coming up near the end of the agenda is we're potentially going to hire 8 different trainers in positive behavior intervention and supports. And one of the articles that I've been following on one of the education nationally, there's a school that adopted this positive behavior intervention and supports, and it's a whole culture change for the entire school. And within a couple years, their graduation rates went from 72% to 89%. The whole climate of the school changed. Everybody's using the same terminology, working together. It's a whole different culture. And I was glad to see we could potentially hire 8 of those trainers that might help with some of these things we're talking about, maybe. Can you go back to the...
Sorry, yeah.
And I think Lisa's making a really important point in, again, how are the resources being used, but I think one of the things that would be helpful is to look at the data either at grade levels or grade spans.
Yeah.
Because I think that tells a very different story. We talk in reading about learning to read and reading to learn.
Right.
Well, if you think about absenteeism, there's a big difference in understanding why children who were,
Why
younger
they're-
not in school versus older not in school. And I know one of the things that I've experienced is people have a perception that absenteeism is more often older students. And that's not necessarily the case. So for us to understand this data at grade levels, I think is really important if our commitment is to help address the issue and support our schools in addressing this issue. It first begins with understanding what grades are the greatest level of chronic absenteeism occurring.
And I think it's a fascinating, because in order to address this one, you actually have to know more, right? You can't
Right,
address
yeah.
this one at that type of scale, you have to know more. And we have looked at that data and there's some other fascinating things that are happening, how students start to disengage at what age levels. There is that trend that maybe I would have predicted, but there's also other trends that happen when you start to look at poverty and look at other things. There's other things that are happening that we have to pay closer attention to as well.
And I would like to include pre-K
Yeah.
in this report, because we're advocating for the importance of pre-K programs, yet if kids aren't in attendance, if there's issues of chronic absenteeism in a pre-K program, that's a beginning flag that's
Setting,
really
yeah,
important.
Yeah.
Big red
Yeah.
flag.
And also an opportunity for schools to interact more quickly sometimes with those, because it just making everyone familiar with the concern around it would help us improve the outcome, I think, so.
You know, I sometimes get concerned about the number of organizations that are trying to deal with the same issue. But in Omaha, there's a couple organizations that specifically are being funded by United Way and Monroe Institute on reducing absenteeism. And we ought to be working with those if we're not, or figure out what the heck they think they're doing,
Yeah.
so.
No, I think that goes specifically to the types of strategies that it's going to take to be able to accomplish moving those types of metrics. So I'm just going to mention this, and I'm going to, our ACT baseline, as I mentioned before, we have work to do as a board to go ahead and dive into the data. I can show you a little bit of that data, but it's the same types of challenges, right? What I've heard from folks across the state, and then from specifically areas of Omaha who are very concerned about what ACT data look like across schools, and you start to see the subgroup challenges and differences. Again, just like I mentioned before, in order for us to make a difference on that, it's going to take intentional work at a community level, at a family level, at a school district level, at a school building level. And we can't accomplish that on our own. I was asked, and it's a fair question, what's the department doing about that? It's like right after we released the data, and I got a lot of what's the department doing? And I said, well, the first thing we got to do was this, right? We're in that mode of being able to understand it. And I tried to explain the notion of how I imagine the state board's going to use that, how we're going to, because I can't just say, gee, school X, Y, or Z, you didn't do. No, it's us doing our job, right? I'm trying to make sure that we own the responsibilities for achievement gaps, that we're doing that work at our level. Because if I turn around and say it's a school, well, that school should do something different. Maybe they should. I'm not going to say that maybe that's not the case. But what are we doing different? I think I said it right and you weren't all here when I was hired, but it was 4 years ago, right, that I started this role, or 5 years ago. Holy moly, I'm losing track anymore. I can't keep it. The reality, I've completed 4 years, so I guess there we go. The reality for us, and I said it at that moment in time, I better show up to help before I show up to criticize, right? This ought to be the nature of our work at the Department of Education, that we're showing up to help. We have regulatory roles, so don't get me wrong. I've got sometimes to be the bad guy, and I have to play the bad. We got to leverage those roles. But if all we did was report data, and this is what I did not like about No Child Left Behind, quite frankly. It was too much about reporting and not much about doing. And so like our ESSA plan, and I'll talk about that more, where people don't understand it is because we're actually trying to do something, right? Different than other states. I know other states that walked through this process and have simply said, hey, look, we're going to do this and we're going to report it, and we're trying to change the theory of action and our responsibility as a state. And I'm not saying other states haven't done that. Some have, and some of those states do better than us when I look at comparable numbers. But that's the model that we ought to be working towards, and that's what we're trying to accomplish. If I'm just to sit back and say, well, it's a local control state, I don't know how many times I've heard that, or we can't do anything about that, or using some other whatever excuse, we should not blame students, we should not blame parents, we should not blame communities, and frankly, we should not blame teachers, and we should not blame school districts. By the way, we should blame me. And by the way, we should blame you It's our job to go get this done. Now, if others don't respond to our interventions and our support, that's different, right? Because we've actually been there doing that. But just to sit on the outside and not actually care about racial achievement gaps and how students are doing or behavioral health, we can't be on the outside and say, well, it's nice that we have that. And that, by the way, that's really tough for an agency like ours, because that's not necessarily what we've always been. I think there are a lot of amazing people at this agency that want to get to this level of work. And so we're in a position to do something remarkable in my view. So I knew I'd be on this soapbox. This is a pure Xbox underneath me or whatever.
At the risk of reiterating what I said, it's those 85 needs improvement schools where we're going to get this change made.
Yeah, and
we've
think-
got the opportunity to really find a way to help them change.
And I think that's the other great thing of what we've identified within AQuest and in the ESSA plan, that if we focus our energy and resources on the places that need our help most, we'll actually be able to improve the system and help everyone else, right? I mean, I think that's our theory of action. I'm going to jump on to the next one. So we probably talked through these slides a little bit more than already, but I don't want to miss anything. You know, each of the goals, I mean, we have aligned underneath the agency, and there's organizational work taking place at the agency that we've shared, and I shared a little bit in December, and we have some specifics that I still have to get to, and I'll be able to report probably more progress on that in February. But there's responsibilities of the deputies that are different than we've ever had before as an agency. There's responsibilities of the chiefs. There's going to be responsibilities of the teams and directors different than we've ever had before. And it shouldn't be a different that scares people, right? It should be a different that excites people about the work that we're going to accomplish. And I don't know if that's true for everyone, but I think that's the reality of where we're trying to go with doing this. And in order to implement that, we had to establish these structures. As we've already discussed, many of these goals require substantial effort. We can't sit back and just, it's nice to report on it. We've got some work to do. And we probably can't accomplish everything. If we focus on too many things, we're not going to get anything done well. So how do we actually make that happen? And we have our theory of action that I just talked about a little bit too. I wanted to hit, because, and I think it's a really fair point on the ESSA plan, and in particular maybe a couple things of perspectives around the ESSA plan right now. And I remember the exact date. I know it was right before Christmas when we got our first phone call and the letter of comments. And a lot of people, you know, internally, externally, and otherwise go, oh man, this looks daunting. Well, look at other states and look at the types of responses they got. We had, can I describe it this way? I don't want to, you know, create any. We had a great conversation with the folks from the Department of Education, right? I mean, we went through line by line on that, and some of it, they're just asking us, well, how do you make this happen? What types of clarification can you give us around this? We like what you're trying to do here. How can we help you describe that so we understand how that matches with the law? That was the tone of our conversation with the U.S. Department of Ed. It wasn't, oh, shame on you, Nebraska, or anything like that. And it always seems like, because we play that regulatory role too. I've sat probably in the middle of both those conversations, someone else regulating us and me regulating someone else, right? I told our team, hey, look, they're trying to get their job done. We're trying to get our job done, and then how are we going to make this happen? It's really about the integration of those things. So I was actually very pleased with that conversation. Does it mean we still have work? Yeah, we still have work to do to describe and build this system the way that you imagined it being built. But I was actually very pleased. And there's these other third-party reviews that take place out there. And on occasion, those will come to my attention. And there's Bellwether and I think Fordham Institute. In the Bellwether case, very few plans across the country met with their expectations of what we're supposed to be in the plans. And you know, Bellwether isn't the U.S. Department of Education, but maybe they're influenced by them. I don't know. I don't know what all those relationships are. So we took that information and be able to review that and go, what are they saying? And actually, it's really good for us to look at it. It's not clear to someone. Why is it not clear? How can we actually make that work better? Fordham also had a review. I was actually pleased with the Fordham review on this front, because I was concerned that Fordham was actually going to look at plans and say, hey, look, we either want A, B, C, D, F, or we want 1-star, 2-star, 3-star. They actually, I think out of all of them, they gave us the highest mark that they gave any state relative to the classification system. that they said it was clear, that part was clear. They probably said other parts of our plan were less clear to them, right? And trust me, some of the other parts of the plan are less clear. We got work to do to be able to make that be implemented. So if we hear of these other, take it in the context of what we're actually doing. Take it in the context. I don't think anyone else was trying to describe in their plan how they're going to change their accreditation system the way that we're trying to change our accreditation system. I don't think anyone else was trying to describe getting a singular process so our schools had one accountability system, not two. I don't think anyone else across the country had the theory of action that we had before ESSA was even passed, right? I mean, we're implementing what we thought was right, and so it's my job to make sure that that is described for the satisfaction of the U.S. Department of Education. And by the way, it will be. So all of the other things that are out here, these third-party reviewers, we're using that information to inform us too, because it actually tells me at least they took the time. I mean, there's probably 12 other people besides the people that had to read the plan that actually read the plan, right? In that sense. We want folks to be engaged, and if this gives us information that improves our plan, then we take that information and improve our plan. And so that's how I see the context of those outside perspectives. We know that our perspectives are about an integrated system, having one system. I remember asking the board, are you sure this is how you want this to work? And when we were trying to write that as a plan, I want to make sure that those concepts came together. Did we do everything perfectly? Or when we started writing it in our processes of engaging people? No. I mean, I just flat out, there's so many more people I would have loved to engage, so many more concepts that we maybe could have imagined, so many other ways. But guess what? You're in charge of the education system in the state of Nebraska. If you want to make those changes, you can make those changes. If you want to make rule be different and better inform and drive school improvement, you can make those changes. And I'm going to be proposing those changes to you, or I'm going to be working with you to propose those changes. So I look at it and go, we have to look at moments in time when we're actually the ones that are responsible, but being responsible has a burden to it. Being responsible also has this leadership piece that I want us to be picking up and taking with us as we go forward. So, gosh, I keep adding soapboxes underneath me, but I feel passionate about this, and I think we have to feel passionate about the work ahead of us. I'm actually very excited for the work ahead of us, and maybe the challenges that we have are less daunting because we're all going to work on them together, to me, and I think that's what's so important. I'm probably maybe testing your patience. I'm going to go back. I wanted to show you one thing, and because by the way, if I dive in and show you the same ACT data again, it's the same conversation about equity and what we're doing. But I wanted to show you that, and now I have the opportunity to go, well, I hope this works for us anyway. So, and the team has just been amazing in trying to report out a series of data. So that report that I gave you, and I know it had the different fonts and things, there's some intention behind that because we had to find a way to actually embed reporting into this website. So this is our strategic plan website that now has taken yet another level, and where you can go goal by goal and look at that progress report on each one of those particular goals, right? So, and I'll pull this up. This is where I get all nervous. So we've automated. Notice how I always do this. Our team
You're not
that's
saying
worked.
I, at least.
Yeah. Okay, good. I know I didn't do
You're
this.
saying we.
Yeah.
Katie's smiling.
Yeah, Katie and the communications team and our data team and everyone that contributes to this work, we're looking for ways that we can report data all the more effectively. So I can write you a report. My team is starting to understand how we're going to demonstrate and show those types of reports to you. So the things that have right now that are about the text shows up in a box. The things that show up with data start to show up this way, and we're trying to build those tool sets because I can't inform schools, and I have to be able to automate this analysis. I can't keep staying up till 1 o'clock in the morning and writing your reports in that way. It's probably not as sustainable as automating the types of things that I want to make sure are automated in our system and our staff and our teams across the agency are making these things happen. And so I just wanted to show you that to you. That, by the way, that's the first time anyone's really seen it, because I think they said, hey, look, we think this might be ready, and you can click on a couple buttons and show this. But I think it's important that we have that. So.
Go in this direction. Don't give us 29-page report.
Yeah. Yeah.
Send us to the link to look. I mean,
Yeah.
that's our leadership responsibility
Yeah.
then to go look. Then you don't have the font issue. And this is big, we can see it.
Yeah.
So no, I think this is a great,
Yeah.
great direction, and
Yeah.
I think it should be the direction as opposed to a lengthy report.
Mhm.
I can't speak for my colleagues, but certainly I'd be looking more for just direct me in
Yeah.
the location
Yeah.
where I can go then and explore the progress. And graphics and all of those pieces are great, so it looks
Yeah.
really good.
So, and I think when you look across this, you'll see all of the outcome areas that we identified in the plan, that you can go and dive in and look at that data now. And I haven't gone all the way through it in this format. The only one I've looked at, pretty much the one you've looked at so far too. But, you know, that's how we're gonna make a difference. Because if I can automate that, then I don't have to reinvent that one more time. We can get on with other things that are about that work. And otherwise, I mean, honestly, I probably spend a lot of time, and you see my emails, you know,
Yeah.
right? I'm trying to find ways that, you know, that you can be engaged in that data in different ways, but not just you, the public at large, and how we do that with schools, the type of systems that, you know, that we hear Dean talking about, that we want to make sure are getting built. We're actually building those things, and it's nice to be able to demonstrate that to you just in a little session. So.
Matt, I'd just like to say I agree wholeheartedly with Rachel in regards to the way the metrics are being showed on the graphics. This is going to help out and be invaluable when we go out to our stakeholders, constituents, people that support the schools, foundations, and so forth. Just show them, this is where we're going,
Yeah.
this is where we're at.
Yeah.
We need your help. It's got to get done.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for your patience with me on all of that, but I hope, and that's where you're starting out a new year and you go, what are all the things that we have? And when it's as cold as it's been, you know, it doesn't put me in the best of moods. You know, my Northern European ancestry puts me, I'd just rather sleep, I think. I'm very excited for the work that we have ahead, and I thank you for what you've done to lay that groundwork and let us continue on this process. So
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. That outstanding conversation, people. That was a very good discussion, and we can certainly note your compassion for what we're doing. Okay, we're going to move on, and Brian, you've had a lot of time to prepare. Brian's going to give us a legislative report.
Good morning, Brian Halstead, Deputy Commissioner. Your agenda has attached to it was now a 3-page document. It should look remarkably similar because it's the same document you had last month when the Legislative Committee reported out. Back in December, there was some notation that there might be some additional things added. There were 3 additional things added to that document. One up top in the leadership, because as we continue our work and the Commissioner talks about Loop County and the work they're doing, they've reached out about a change in a law that requires now them to go to an annual vote every year to continue their high school. They had to do that vote for the first time in November of last year, and I think 90% of the voters said yes. They're now wondering, why do we have to go back again next November and the fall? So we are working with them. They are working with the senator about seeing if that can't be modified somewhat to still have an annual review of it, but what the proper process is for the community to give input if they don't have sufficient numbers of students that they find themselves at the moment. So that was added. And believe it or not, since December, there's ongoing discussions about school finance and all of those issues, and we added that topic just because staff have been contacted on numerous occasions from numerous different sources to address and look at and all of that, and we know that's going to be an ongoing issue this next session, most likely out in the outer years also, because that's an ongoing issue that was there. The final one is over on page 2 that deals under the category that also has early childhood education. An addition, because we brought to our attention there's some interest in having communities, whether that's a small city, medium-sized city, big city, counties, as they're doing their comprehensive planning that they're all doing, and they are adding in an element about them looking at early childhood and how the community, however you want to categorize it, is looking to address that, which seemed to us to be that's something the community needs to be involved in. You need to recognize that with many of our families, most of the adults in those families are all working, so what is child welfare and child care going on? So we added that under that tenet. All of the rest of those are what were there last month. I'm gonna let, I think, either the commissioner or the chair of the legislative committee talk about what was there last month and where you guys want to go at this point.
Okay, Rachel?
Yeah, and I think, thank you, Brian, for the update, and I think the intent of the legislative committee is, as we move later today, to take action in support of accepting this document, whatever, support of the document, predominantly to give direction here in January that helps communicate what our legislative framework looks like, our positions, our priorities, so that as we move in then to moving our legislative retreat to February, we kind of are on the same page of this legislative session. Here are the goals, the framework, the positions that are important to us. So I don't know if the committee, Molly isn't here, but Maureen, Pat, if you have anything you want to add about the document. Well, and thanks to the committee for their work in putting this together as well. And Brian, thank you for all your work and the staff's work in putting it
Commissioner, do
together.
you have any additions?
No, I actually do appreciate also the guidance and the approach and the conversations about how we become proactive in that effort. And I, again, kind of add that to our workload this coming year. But I think the more we understand what we want to get accomplished, the sooner we describe that, the better off we are. So thanks for that effort.
Okay, thanks, Brian. We'll move on to item 5.3, orientation, and this is something that some of us do know, some of us always need to be reminded, and just a little, Brian, take it away.
So I've pulled up on the screen, hopefully in a moment, the document that's uploaded for you in Sparc. You may not have had an opportunity to review that before the meeting because it got added a little later. The goal of it, though, was to be a resource for you for the coming year, not necessarily to have read before today, but to take with you. So at the end of last month's meeting in conference with the president and vice president and the commissioner, we put together some topics, or what I'll call the top 4 for 2018 of what you might want to know and keep in mind. And I think sometimes looking at these pieces helps answer the question of why do we do things the way that we do them? And certainly you are familiar with the policy reference manual on the website. Perhaps you have a printed copy as well. If you're having trouble finding that on the new website, stop me today or sometime and I'll be happy to direct you in that location. I think that the work that the policy committee and staff have done recently in reorganizing that is really useful, and we've outlined that here with those 3 types of documents. The internal policy directives, which really is you telling the commissioner and the staff how to operate on certain matters. The bylaws, which are how you as a board have agreed to operate. And then position statements, this idea of model policies perhaps, or guidance and direction for school districts that isn't necessarily law or compulsory. I've pulled, with consultation of the commissioner and some of his team, some examples here of policies and bylaws to refer you to, and those are in the attached pages here. I've highlighted things that I thought were really interesting here that maybe would be interesting for you. Certainly the policies that we've pulled out here aren't any more important than the others, but they're ones I think where there are common questions. And so as we get down, for example, to under bylaw B8, parliamentary procedure, you might wonder sometimes, why does Denise call the order in a different way? Well, it's because it's in the policy, and there's probably a reason for that to keep people on their toes too, right? So we don't get into the habit of voting in the same way. I did pull out too, from state statute, the piece where it describes in statute how the board is to organize itself. And so there's some nice references there for you as well. So again, the top one thing is some of those pieces from the policy reference manual. I've pulled those pieces out that I think are interesting. You may or may not, but certainly they're worth reviewing, I think. Another one I'll highlight while we're here, B17, public statements by board members, and I'll share a best practice on that. Rachel writes a monthly article for the newspapers in her area, and I know that some of you are interested in pursuing that as well. And at the bottom of that, she simply states that these views are her own and not reflective of the board. And so that's a great example of that policy in action. The second part of that top 4 for 2018 are some parliamentary procedure basics. I know that Patsy and Lisa, in attending the NASB New Member Institute, are now even more experts in that area. Scott certainly brings us a wealth of knowledge in that from a legal perspective. Incidentally, I have a lot of interest in this because I used to teach it as a high school ag teacher, so it comes onto the top 4. Scott prepared a while back a document, hints on preparing motions, and you'll find that in this in the following pages as well. He does a nice job of lining out I move, for example, as opposed to I make a motion. It's not wrong to say I make a motion. It's a stronger statement. It follows Robert's Rules of Order, which this board has agreed to as its parliamentary procedure operations. There's some ideas here too, some rules of thumb that are put forward by Robert's Rules and the National Association of Parliamentarians about rules of thumb for debate. Certainly not trying to make anything more formal. Often when there's smaller boards, the rules are a little more relaxed, right? But those are some of the common top 5 recommendations on debate. For example, if one makes the motion, they have the privilege of the first opportunity for debate, right? Something else I think that's interesting to note too, when a motion is made and a person seconds it, the person seconding it isn't necessarily saying they agree with the motion. They're saying that they think that that topic is worthy of debate, because what that person might have in mind is to amend the motion or debate against it, for example. But they're saying, hey, look, I want to talk about this motion, and so that's the purpose of a second. Lisa and Patsy were given this resource at the NASB conference, the New Member Institute, and I think Lisa had worked with Scott to provide you with copies. It may not be yellow. We're going to have some additional copies of this from the National Association of Parliamentarians around, so if you want another copy of that, I didn't put this in that document because they have a copyright on it. The third part of the top 4 is related to committee work, and I reference again the bylaw related to committees. I think it excites me that this board was organized into the committees. When I came into this role, I think there's a lot of power in committee work, and I think we've seen that a couple of times this year already. And I'll use examples of where I've sat in as a staff member in the Teaching and Learning Committee with the ACT, and more recently with the Civic Readiness Definition, where the committee said, you know what, we need to work more on this. And that doesn't prohibit conversation happening within the full board. The idea is that the committee would really dig into that and bring forward a recommendation to the full board. That should not prohibit discussion among the full board or further discussion among the full board, because the goal during the work session then, of course, would be for the committee to educate and orient with staff's help to make everybody an expert on that topic and feeling really good about where they stand on that item, whether it's an action item or not. Our hope, and we know that you are reading those materials, but perhaps a friendly reminder is if you're not on a committee and you have an interest in a topic, and I know that many of you do this, feel welcome to reach out to that committee chair in advance to make your thoughts known and to get a sense from that person where they're at, or even to share with them what you might want to be expressed in that committee about that topic. That would certainly be appropriate from an operational, logistical standpoint of committee structure. The last item under committee work with E, the committee program of work for 2018. In those regular conversations with the president and vice president and commissioner after every month's meeting, it's become very clear that we probably need to outline a program of work for each committee. In the bylaw, B2, committee work, it just gives a general description of the purpose of each of those committees. And some committees, it's really clear, like Budget and Finance, you know, and that committee's been in place for many years, and so that committee knows what it's looking at. Legislative Committee.
Actually, that one hasn't been in
Okay.
No,
Well, it's been in
not
place
good.
longer than the 6 or 9 months that I've been around.
There you go.
Let me restate that. It might be more clear in Budget and Finance what the tasks are, right? Whereas in Student Success and Access, it might be a little more nebulous yet what those tasks are. And so one of the things that we have drafted are what are some of those regular topics that might come before a meeting. It's certainly not a limiting document, it's a guidance document. And one of the things that we have sectioned out in there are rules. And so you've started to see rules coming through committees, and we've sort of made some decisions that, well, it kind of makes sense that this one would come through this committee, but being a little more clear about which rules would come through each committee. It was suggested in strategic planning that there be these regular reports about the strategic plan. That makes sense, perhaps hadn't been articulated before, so that is in the draft for that committee's program of work. I'm not sharing those today because I don't think they're ready to share. The distribution of rules was mine and another staff member's look, and that needs to be looked at by more people. I think the thought with those would be that when committees convene in February, by or before then, committee chairs would have an opportunity to see those programs of work and take a look at those to see what else might be added to those.
Mm-hmm.
They could be added to throughout the year as well. So again, that's simply a guidance document that we look to be able to provide the committees in helping you see the projection, because there is a lot of work to be done, and sometimes putting that down on paper helps clarify that. The last piece on the top 4 is with respect to Sparc Navigation. I think you, like us, have been learning with that.
Oh, my.
I want to take a moment to show you how to get to archived meetings, and if you know how to do it, I apologize, and I also understand that showing you here once isn't necessarily going to stick with everyone. But again, as with any of these, feel free to chat with me later one-on-one and we can go through things again. So I'll bring Sparc up to what it looks like, at least when I log into it, which I expect is pretty similar to you. And you may be familiar with the meeting showing up over here, and so that looks a little different this month because we only have this meeting, but we would also would have seen some of the other meetings as well, like the work session. And so board members, you would be able to see those committee meetings, but you might want to go back to a committee meeting to see what that looked like from a previous month, or to recall. And so from this area, you're not going to be able to see that, but if you scroll all the way to the bottom to where it says view additional meeting information, that's step 1. And you're still not going to get there yet. So you got to scroll down all the way to the bottom again to go to view archived meetings. And when you get to the archive meetings, then you're gonna have access to those committee meetings and the notes from those committee meetings if you're wanting to recall something from a previous month. And so you'll see I scrolled those through December and through November. So again, from the first screen, scrolling all the way down to the bottom and clicking. From the second screen, scrolling all the way down to the bottom and clicking. And of course, we're always willing to talk through that with you on the phone or in person. And I think Laura, Denise, and I are all pretty well versed, those two actually more than I am in this software.
Just
Rachel?
a quick question. Do you know when it becomes archived? Is it immediately following, or is there a little bit of a time? I've kind of a couple times tried to, do you happen to know the time period from
Yeah.
after a meeting when it falls into that archive?
Laura can answer that,
Okay.
and I'll tell you that either in a moment or at a break.
Okay, no
Yep.
problem.
So, those are the top 4 that we've put together for 2018 as an opportunity to reorient. I encourage you to take a look at those policies and see what those look like. I think they help describe, again, why the board functions the way that it does, why those committees are in place. And if you're like me and find it fun and interesting, you might just reread the whole policy manual. But that's probably not necessary, and of course,
Oh,
we're
that's obsessive.
willing to help answer those questions. I did include in that document, I skipped over it, and I will draw attention back to it. As one of the first pieces, I included a document that we prepared for staff with respect to expectations about communicating with board members from the staff perspective, which falls out of 2 or 3 board policies about those line and staff relations. Certainly not, this is not a new document, it's updated recently, and not a new policy as well. And so, as you know the practice, feel welcome to reach out to the commissioner and me. I'm probably the one who's gonna end up gathering the information. And we'll work together to get the information that you need and point you in the right direction. And I would say to that as well, you might review the one on legal assistance, because there's some pieces in there where it's appropriate to contact legal counsel.
Matt?
I just want to add one point on this, because even as I make organizational changes, so we're probably going to eventually have one of these documents communicating with, or the commissioner communicating with people in the agency, right? It's not a, it's such a large agency, and I can run into someone in the hall and then not share that information with Deb or Brian or Mark, and then they're suddenly not too happy with me because I didn't know, and then they're caught by surprise. So our communication of this with staff is also just so we're doing our best to make sure all that's done. So there's never any intent that there's not an opportunity for you to gather that information. This is about just making sure that we're doing our work as best as we possibly can, and folks aren't caught in any type of bad position. So that's our intent with all of this. And like I said, I think Dr. Friesen in particular is probably the one that hits me up on occasion on that topic. But I mean, it's a fair topic. I mean, you can't. There's the importance of folks knowing and understanding and being involved in that. So I thank Ryan for sharing that.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, thank you. It's always, even as long as I've been here, it's always good to be reminded of some things in procedures and processes, and we do have new staff from time to time, and we also have a very active staff. So I think all of this reorientation is a good idea. Okay, we will now move on to the consent agenda process.
And I guess this is a little backwards, because normally we have the day to review that, but if you did happen to have anything that you wanted to be removed, I know we have the P form here. I don't know if we have another break before we get to that, but at the very least, if there is something else you want removed from that agenda, please let us know. So.
Okay. You want to report on the rules?
Yeah, I should open up doing my Sparc meeting training right now too. Sorry about that.
I think we're all still working on that.
Well, and I will say, I mean, I think they've added quite a few different tool sets to that, which I think has some value, but it's sometimes hard when things suddenly move around on you, I know, so. Get down the right line. So there is the regular update within that has Rule 24, Rule 11, Rule 21 that are up for hearing. We're actually going to have a conversation on Rule 11 here, and there's another point of process that I want to chat through when we have Rule 11 come up about how we're thinking about ensuring that rules in the context of doing our work across the agency are also getting engaged in our strategic plan. So that's something on Rule 11 in particular I want to be able to chat with you about and have it take the opportunity to do that. And then you can see that the public hearings are scheduled for those rules as well within that document. So, and I guess
Okay.
page 2, make sure I'm not missing something else here. Yeah, page 2 has the ones that are waiting for the governor and the attorney general's approval. So.
Okay. Ryan, do you have more? Okay. We'll move on to item 6, discussion items. And how's everybody holding up after all this discussion? Everybody okay? All right. We are going to have a discussion on the process that's involved with civic readiness.
Yeah, so thanks for allowing me to do this. First of all, obviously we had a pretty long and intensive conversation last month around our civic readiness definition, and the importance of civic readiness, I think, from the perspective of the board with it among among the goals in the strategic plan is to actually be able to identify civic readiness, define civic readiness, and then measure civic readiness. And so the conversations that we had and where we left it in December is kind of a reminder is when we had an opportunity to hear from Senator Groney what the conversation was. Well, maybe go back and Senator Groney and the commissioner can have some conversations about what the next steps are. Actually, it was before Christmas. Senator Groney and I were able to sit down and discuss where kind of what he was thinking about this, and he really did explain where he hopes to be able to ensure that the conversation at the legislature is resolved. And one of the things, and one of my bigger concerns around what's in statute is still that criminal penalty piece, right? I think that's a barrier for us to do our work around the definitions. We actually had good conversations and have listened to the feedback from all of the folks that came here and have recommendations to bring forward back into the conversations with the committee and begin that work again. I mean, as soon as possible, actually. And I'm pointing to Maureen.
She's
I
the
know that the
chair.
committee structure, depending on how everything else goes for the board org, but that's what we want to have happen and have that dialogue. And so our process will be go back to the committee, do that work. I think Ryan did a nice job of describing the importance of those committee processes to really be thoughtful and move that forward. What I will also say is, we're trying to provide leadership and balance between the role of the legislature and our role. And I was actually very pleased with the conversation with Senator Groney for a couple different reasons, because we got to have a talk about that as well. I said we have the opportunity to interpret what's in statute, right, always, and be able to implement that. And I don't think we were that far apart. He was actually using the draft of the amendment that we looked at before to say, hey, look, well, I'm trying to find ways that we actually get this accomplished. And I'm not saying that every element of that is what ends up happening, but I did tell him that I appreciated the opportunity to engage with him and see what happens in the first few days of the legislative session and go back, and then we will come back and do our work in February in the committee, and if we're ready to go to full board discussion, we can do that too.
Maureen?
Quick question. When was that statute put into place? Do you know the year that it was put into place?
The Americanism
Yes.
because
Because it's been quite a while
I need my
ago.
walking statute book to help me on that
It was
front.
1951.
Yeah. Oh, you got the actual statute book. All right.
The year I was born?
But it's been modified over times, right? I mean, there's been modifications to that. Oh, I'm not going anywhere else.
Maureen, can I just suggest, this topic got a lot of conversation last month, if you bring a revised definition to the board that is created just a day or two before the next board meeting, I frankly don't think that's gonna be enough time to digest that. And I think that we need to be able
You're
to
right.
give folks the opportunity to come and speak to that issue again. So, I would hope we don't come here with the intention next month of just rubber stamping, no offense, but just rubber stamping whatever the committee ends up recommending.
Patrick, I would just like to add to that really was one of the pieces of conversation in our committee, was that we wanted to listen, to hear what folks had to say, and to give that more thought to, do we need to be changing things? Do we need to be tweaking? And I appreciate this board allowing that to happen, and I think we have given people an opportunity.
Marina was 1949.
49. I think that comes back to, I think we have tried to do 30-day processes, and I think that's important to maintain.
Yes.
30-day, once a draft comes, that we have 30 days before we're gonna be reacting again. I think we've tried to do that with our standards. We've tried to do that with important pieces. I think that's really important to continue. And I mean, I don't know that we've formally codified that in our rules. Brian, you can check that, or you probably have that off the top of your head.
I don't think.
But I think that is important, that we continue down that pathway of time.
Absolutely. Okay. We have one more discussion item, and that is Rule 11 that the Commissioner mentioned earlier, and so I'll turn it over to him.
And I'll have Melody go ahead and come on up. First of all, there's always, with a lot of our rules, some of them have a need for regular review and other things. And as I started to mention before, it's important that we find ways that when rules have to come up for different purposes, that we also have opportunities to have conversations about other things that might happen. And I know in particular there's been work and conversation around other areas of early childhood interest and other possibilities on those particular fronts. And what Ryan had mentioned earlier about processes where we're having those committee conversations, and I think it's a legislative committee. I'm not making that up out of my mind, and maybe I am, but the legislative committee really had a conversation around reading, and this rule might be implicated for that purpose and other purposes that the board had, but that wasn't the intention necessarily of the rule changes that Melody brings forward. So I thought I'd have her present that, but I also wanted to be able to have the conversation about other things that are of interest to you. So.
Okay. Melody?
I am Melody Hobson. I am the team leader for the Office of Early Childhood. And I just wanted to go over the changes that we are proposing in Rule 11. And most of those changes are actually just clarifications of wording. In 2015, we did a revision of Rule 11, and we did some substantial reorganization of it. We added the information about infants and toddlers, which had been missing for a number of years after the sixpence legislation. Okay. We also looked at, along with that, the home visiting requirements and things like that. So with that, it was a substantial reorganization, and with that, we thought we clarified everything that we needed to clarify. Well, apparently we didn't. So some of our clarifications needed clarifications. So that's a lot of what this rule is. There are a couple of things that have been added with this. One of them is we did notice that when you have certified teachers, they have to go through the background check before being hired. And our paras need to go through, the child abuse and registry, but we had nothing for home visitors. And especially when you have someone going into the home, we thought that it was prudent and not only for the families, but also to protect the school district that we require some background check for the home visitors. They tend not to fall under the certification requirements because a home visitor does not have to have a teaching certificate. So that has been added in, and there will be a little bit of cost to that, but across the state, I think at last year we had like 46 individuals who were reported in that role. So it's not a large amount of money that any school district would have to come up for that. The other thing that we added was we moved the annual contact professional development hours from 12 hours to 15 hours. And that is because it meets some national standards, but also there is some research to say that programs that have more than 14 hours of professional development tend to be a little bit better. You tend to get better outcomes. That's an additional 3 hours that we don't think will cause a lot of increased cost, because a lot of the professional development hours are things that can be arranged at the training center that are either free, many times for pairs. I mean, we have a number of very good online options, independent study options, and we do encourage the school districts. And actually, truly, we think that school districts do a lot more than 15 hours for their teachers anyway. So we don't think that would be a significant issue for most school districts, but we do think it's important to kind of improve that. The other thing we did, since we had this open, since we were looking at it, we did reference some more specific language around using the data that school districts get from their child assessments to really focus their instruction to improve child outcomes in reading and in math. And so there is some wording there. It's not prescriptive in exactly, we don't expect everybody to use one specific method, but they do need to be using that information. So those are the big things. Do you have any questions that I could answer?
John?
Quick question, Melody. Thank you very much. In regards to some of the clarifications that you made within the rule, were they inputted by some of our stakeholders? And our stakeholders?
Stakeholders, school districts, based on some of the confusion that we had with people filling out the program report, we realized, okay, people aren't necessarily understanding the difference between a center-based program and a home-based program.
Good.
So we wanted to add some things like that. A number of our programs also, along our school districts, also collaborate with Head Start, and we wanted to make sure that the language was not prohibitive for the school districts to be able to continue that collaboration. Head Start sometimes uses different language, and we wanted to make sure that it was all, it didn't cause any problems.
Very good. Thank you.
Rachel?
Yeah, Melody, thank you for, I think, on behalf of the Legislative Committee, putting the reading and math, the intervention, the discussions that we had around intervention into Rule 11. I think that really reflected well on the discussions that we've had. The one piece that I know, and I think Brian's going to speak to it a little bit, the Legislative Committee also discussed at length the providing along those intervention kinds of thinkings, early intervention, a process in which if a 4-year-old was turning 5 but really was not, maybe had some developmental delays, not a disability, not receiving services under special education, but truly maybe not quite ready for kindergarten. We had this in my area where a school and a family really felt that child needed a little more time in the pre-K program, but is not allowed to. And I believe it is a statutory issue. And so I did ask Brian if he could just speak a little bit to that so that we are on the same page that it's not something we can change in
Right.
Rule 11 at this time because of the need for statutory change, which actually is on our position. And so I know if you want to speak briefly to what's happening from a statutory perspective, that would bring Rule 11 hopefully back to us in the near future.
Well, I think that's an issue we've all looked at, and the commissioner and Dr. Friesen and Melody and I all had a conversation earlier the week on the whole concept and trying to work together to come up with ways in which that can do some of that. The legislature, Senator Stinner, has already introduced a bill that does many of the things that your item lists for early childhood and pre-kindergarten, so that'll start at least the discussion on the legislative side. But the concept, Ms. Wise, that you're talking about on the 4 or 5-year-old thing, that does require a change in statute, because about 10 or 11 years ago, the legislature was very specific on that particular point because of a concern at that time that we think can be better handled today through regulation instead of an outright mandate, because there has come to be that there are the few who are in a situation, but a blanket rule for everybody sometimes negatively impacts. So that's part of the ongoing conversation. And
Especially given the context of the need for early intervention and LB 651 that was proposing retention at 3rd grade level, you know, to start to move into retention when we maybe have an opportunity for some kids pre-K, when we know there's additional time needed, that we ought to allow the professionals and families to
Yes.
be given that opportunity for that child at that point in time. And so following that from a statutory perspective, I think, is an important priority for us.
Good. Maureen, did you have a question?
I did. I finally found where I was looking for it. I couldn't remember if I read it under the legislative part or the pre-kindergarten, but that was transitioning kindergarten programs by school districts to the same instructional hours as all elementary grades by the 2019-20 year. Melody or Brian, can you clarify the difference in the hours between that right now?
Okay, I didn't bring all of that with me, but we did some analyzation of what school districts report. And what we found was there were 5 districts a year ago that reported that they did not have any sections of all-day, everyday kindergarten. One of those was a data error, so we actually, I think, have had 4 districts that did not offer any full-day, everyday kindergarten. There are a number of other districts that offer a few sessions or may offer a part-day option and a full-day option. So that would not change with any of the legislation that's being proposed. So it's kind of become a non-issue about 1,032 hours. Most every place in the state already has full-day everyday kindergarten. The statute as it stands now says that you have to offer at least 400 hours of kindergarten. That is so out of date. Nobody offers only 400 hours of kindergarten. So the impetus for this came from, that's an antiquated number. We're almost already there. We need to just acknowledge that and move on.
Okay, Lisa?
I was thinking along, I think I had it on and turned it off. I think it's on now. I'll get it right. I was thinking along the same lines as Rachel. I was going to speak up with that, was it 651 and the reading from last year. There are going to be attempted changes, and I think a positive change, rather than failing a kid at 3rd grade, are the interventions, especially with when you can early detect dyslexia and retrain the brain. There's so much positiveness that can come from those early interventions. You would never think about failing somebody at 3rd grade. It's just ridiculous.
Right.
Because they can't read.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you. I think that's a move in the right direction. Okay, we're going to move into the reorganization of the board, and then I promise you we will take a break. Okay. So, I would like to request a motion, a 2-part motion, indicating that the commissioner, as the secretary of the state board, will preside over the nominations and election process, and a roll call vote will be used during the election, after which the commissioner will declare the result. Do I hear a motion to this effect?
So moved.
there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Patrick and seconded by Rachel that we put this motion forward. Your votes, please.
Tim,
Yes.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
McPherson,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Fricky,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
O'Halloran. 7 yes, 1 absent.
Okay. Commissioner.
Always the most nervous part for me, actually, quite frankly. Nominations are now open for President of the State Board of Education. According to Robert's Rules of Order, no seconds are required for nominations. A member may nominate himself or herself. Votes may be cast for any current member of the State Board, even if they are not nominated. And so, with that, we'd open nominations. Rachel?
Yes, I'd like to nominate John Witzel as president.
Are there any further nominations? Hearing none, nominations are now closed. Board members are reminded that a majority of votes cast is required for an election. Abstentions do not count as votes cast. Denise, please call the roll for each member's vote for board president.
Fricky,
Yes.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
McPherson,
Before I cast my vote, I have a couple comments to make. I find it interesting that once again this year, as was the case last year, that I was not contacted by either of the parties destined to win the positions of board chairman and vice chairman to even ask for my vote or announce that they were running or even ask for my opinions. Apparently the decision for the leadership had already been made. With that said, I'd like to suggest that the juxtaposed leadership try to be a little bit more transparent, more proactive, more respectful, and less insulting in the future. I don't believe that sitting behind closed doors in a room before a board meeting and making a decision that the board will only give citizens 3 minutes to testify, rather than the 5 they came understanding they would have, is a very open process. Nor do I think that the excuse that we really don't have sufficient time to hear these folks because we need to get on to lunch is very respectful of the citizens who sent us here. I don't feel that it is very professional to insult and or ignore board members, as has been the situation in my case with the leadership we are about to elect. I hope the juxtaposed new leadership will be a little bit more proactive in the coming year, as it appears to me that all we've seen is reaction and sometimes little of that when appropriate. I've seen little leadership in discussing anything other than what is brought to the board by the administration, and this is not a criticism of the administration. Despite efforts by some to ignore or hush my comments, concerns, or questions, I will continue to ask questions and make suggestions. For example, I've been asking for the last 4 months, why haven't we followed through on the board's obligation to select another priority school to replace Druid Hill? We've seen abysmal ACT scores at some of our schools and have virtually no discussion about them. I hope the new leadership will make some changes in 2018, and my vote is no.
So, and I apologize on the voting side. I guess the proper protocol is that you would name the name of the person you're voting for. And so, even though there were, I think we had two yeses, you can, is Scott or Ryan, did you just go back to the roll call again and start with the ones you started with? Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. That's my fault.
okay. So, Fricky,
So John has been nominated, John Witzel's been nominated, for instance, so you said yes before, and so you can just simply say,
So I need to say his name.
yeah.
I vote for John Wetzel, who's been nominated.
Co-Johns,
I vote for John Wetzel, who's been nominated.
McPherson,
I vote no.
Wise,
I vote yes for John Witzel.
Witzel,
I vote yes for John Witzel.
Tim,
I vote yes for John Witzel.
O'Halloran, Nichols.
I vote yes for John Witzel.
We have 6 yes, 1 absent, 1 no for John Witzel.
So obviously, the president of the State Board of Education for the year 2018 is John Witzel. Congratulations, John. Nominations are now open for vice president. According to Robert's Rules of Order, no seconds are required for nominations. A member may nominate himself or herself. Votes may be cast for any current member, even if they are not nominated. Now it's open for nominations. Maureen?
I nominate Patricia Tim if she is okay with that.
Are there any further nominations? So board members are again reminded that a majority of votes cast is required for an election. Abstentions do not count as votes cast. Denise, please call the roll for each member's vote for board vice president. And again, just as a reminder, just name the name of the person. I guess that's proper. So.
Nichols,
I vote yes for Patricia Tim.
Fricky,
Vote yes for Patricia Tim.
Wise,
Yes for Patricia Tim.
Tim,
Yes for Patricia Tim.
Witzel,
I vote yes for Patricia Tim.
McPherson,
I vote no.
Co-Johns,
I vote yes for Patricia Tim.
Molly O'Halloran. So we have 6 for Tim, 1 no, and 1 absent.
All right, so the Vice President of the State Board of Education for the year 2018 is Patricia Tim. So I believe we want to take a little break just to get reorganized and then come right back. I don't think it'll take us all that long. We'll go ahead and do that quickly. And so I don't know if we want to set a time, maybe say 5 minutes, I think, or 10, maybe 10 minutes. I think probably everybody could use a break, by the way. So let's say 10 minutes and be back here in about 10 minutes. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, the State Board of Education, we are going to come back to our meeting, if you will. We've got everybody here. In regards to discussing membership to committees, we're going to leave those as they are. We'll stand pat right now with membership and the assignments as we have them. And I'll give you an email and within the next, if you will, couple of weeks to confirm that. If you've got any changes, additions, anything that you want to make comments about your membership, please do not hesitate to contact me. But as it stands right now, we'll go with what we got. Any questions? Yeah, Mo.
So if someone did want to look at a different committee, they could talk to you about that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I reserve the right to make changes within the next 2 weeks, however, also. Thank you very much. Any other questions on board membership, committee membership? Our next action item is the action item to accept the legislative committee report on the legislative priorities. Is there a motion to accept the legislative committee report on the legislative priorities?
I move to accept the report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion was made by Rachel and seconded by Patrick McPherson. Is there any discussion? Denise, roll call, please.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
McPherson,
Yes.
Fricky,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes,
O'Halloran. 7 yes, 1 absent.
motion passes. Commissioner, do you want to talk about the consent agenda?
I don't believe we have any changes, so I think it's as presented.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I so move.
Second.
Motion was made by Lisa, seconded by Maureen. Is there any discussion? Denise, please roll call.
McPherson,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
Fricky,
Yes.
O'Halloran. 7 yes, 1 absent.
Thank you very much. We will now have the opportunity for board members to provide a brief report on the recent meetings they have attended. If you have nothing to report, feel free to pass. Mo, did you want to start?
Yes, other than talking with some teachers of all different ranges this last month, I was asked to attend the Hampton Public Schools, their elementary program, which was on our Thursday evening of our last board meeting, which I did not attend, but their junior high and high school program on the 19th, which was wonderful to see community come together in a small school setting, and it was great.
Thank you. Patrick?
Yes, on December 11th, I had an opportunity to sit down with Harris Payne and Nancy McCabe from the university, or from Bellevue University, along with another individual from Bellevue University, and talk a little bit about the social studies curriculum that we'll be looking at, and the civics definition. And for those of you who don't know, Bellevue has a tremendous civics and social studies program, and all students are required to participate in it. But they'd like to be further involved, so I thought that was a helpful meeting, and I really appreciate Harris being present to do that. On December the 18th, I attended the We the People event, and that was really interesting to watch 7 or 8 high schools across the state participate in that event. Totally social studies oriented, just a tremendous event. And then yesterday I had the opportunity to to attend the Open Sky Symposium held over in the Capitol building. I'm sure my colleagues who were there will have more to say on that, but The news is not good, obviously, we've heard that from Brian and others. It's gonna be a tough year legislatively, budget-wise. There was a speaker brought in from the Rockefeller Institute who did a pretty good job pointing out all the issues we're up against, whether it's demographics or budget or whatever. And so bottom line is probably won't get much done this year anyway. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Lisa?
Well, went a couple places. One of the panels that I had a chance to listen to were high school students from around the state, and very intelligent young men and women. And they had some things at the end that they wanted to say, and three of them kind of caught my attention. They say they won't go into teaching because of all the testing. I was kind of sad about that. And they did say that the ACT was more meaningful than the NISA test, so they were thankful for that. And one of the main things almost all of them said was, I wish they would have had more life skills in high school to prepare them for being out on their own. You know, whether it's financially, one of the boys said cooking, and I thought, yes. So that was really a good thing. And then I met, I thought it'd be an hour meeting. It was 2.5 hour meeting with two constituents in Elkhorn and the Millard area about dyslexia. And their concern is that it's not diagnosed early. One of them is the parent of a dyslexic student, and he's in 4th grade and was released from the program that he was in, and there's no monitoring, and she's really worried about that. She would like his progress to be monitored more closely by the same people that were helping him improve. And so the Open Sky, I was there yesterday, and one of the graphics that the person from the Rockefeller Institute showed that, what was it? Goods had gone down, you know, as far as taxation, and something else had gone way down, but services were above the 0% and steady. And it caught my attention that there are some, I suppose, extravagant services that don't have any taxes, and adding a 0.5 cent or a cent onto these, what I would consider extravagant services, would bring in additional revenue to the general budget and maybe help things out. And I guess Senator Breezy has some form of a bill that I found out about yesterday, but I haven't had a chance to read it. Because I don't want to hurt medicine, I don't want to hurt agriculture, I don't want to hurt people in poverty, but I'm talking about, you know, like a spa day, you know, things that won't hurt those people. And so, and We the People, wow, those kids are brilliant. And the way they expressed themselves and answered the questions from the judges was amazing. It was a good civic experience for me, so I enjoyed it.
Rachel?
Yes, I am just going to talk about one thing I did, and that was going to an advocacy day that Wisner, Pilger, and Stanton hosted. And they hosted that day to really advocate for the great things happening in their school districts. And so they invited folks in, started in the morning with Wisner Pilger, tour of the facilities, talking a lot about program. A lot of great discussion around maps and where we're heading with NWA, and little maybe concern that NWA in our direction won't link with maps as well as they'd like to see it. And so that was kind of the takeaway from the morning of we need to look at that a little bit and understand that a little bit better, because they're really doing some amazing individual goal setting at Wisner Pilger with their kids, and to focus on achievement at that really individual student level. And then the same with Stanton, some great activities happening with Stanton. There we focused a little bit also on some of the arts programs and the fabulous art teacher and some of the work that they have the students do in the community as well as in the school in really focusing on the arts.
And then I didn't stay for the basketball game. It ended with Wisner, Pilger, and Stanton playing basketball, and it was the icy day, December 21st. I thought I better be heading for home. So, yeah, slowly go home, crawl home. But anyway, it's great to be in both of those two schools. Great schools.
Thank you, Rachel. Patsy?
Well, I thought I might just tell you where I was in December, and I can kind of do that just with the statistic. I actually had the opportunity to either watch or judge about 140 plays. And I traveled the state from corner to corner. And in case you don't know it, Nebraska is a really beautiful place at sunset and at sunrise. And some of the places that I ended up would be, just to give you an idea, Wausau, Central City, Shickley, Kearney, York. I did make it back to Lincoln High. There. But all kinds of schools across this state. And if I could put that experience with the experience of we the people and make a comment as a teacher, I would say that it is amazing what young people can do when they are challenged to do so. And I'd like to extend the opportunity to anyone who would like to come with me next year to state play production, where all students are given the opportunity to compete from the beginning and come through, and to either work in front of the curtain or behind the curtain. And they all produce these amazing productions. There's not one time that I have taken a person there to watch it that they haven't been so extraordinarily surprised at the quality of the productions that are presented. And the challenge now is to keep that challenge that is co-curricular and extracurricular and make it curricular and let it make our kids even better. I did also do one other thing that I wanted to talk about, some other things, but the other thing I wanted to talk about is, having been a teacher all my life, I had not been to the legislature many times, and often when I went, it was for a specific purpose, and I was rushed in and rushed out. And so one of my New Year's resolutions was that I was going to go and sit in the gallery as many times as I could, and I'd never been to the opening of the legislature ever. So I went yesterday and sat by myself, pretty much at the top. It wasn't full. I had to get at the top to be able to see anything. But I was so impressed with two things: the camaraderie at the beginning of it. Nebraska still has that going, and I hope we keep that going. And the second thing that I was impressed with was Matt Williams, one of the senators from Gothenburg, Nebraska, did the opening inspiration or prayer. And he talked about two things, and I thought they might also be inspirational to us as the board. And he said that he had gone to church, and his minister brought up the theme, "Are you ready?" And so he challenged this year's 105th legislative session to be ready. And then the second thing he challenged them to was to find the epiphanies. In other words, the aha ideas that might help us overcome some of the great challenges that we have in education because of money or because of mindsets. And so, find the epiphanies and be ready.
Thank you, Patsy. Patricia?
December was kind of quiet in my area. I did have an opportunity to talk to several administrators and staff and. No. I was honest. I had the opportunity to talk to several administrators and staff members and curriculum directors, and we had discussions about how we had set test score baselines and how it had affected them, and we talked about the fact that several of them mentioned, this is going to cause me to really look at my curriculum and the succession of where courses are taught. And so I think there will be some good that comes out of it, even though there has been some grumbling. But, you know, I think it's really gonna cause them to look at the offerings that they're giving and how they're being presented, and will cause them to stop and think and maybe have an epiphany, as you say. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. If I could just give me a minute here. I had the honor of meeting with the ESU 3, the Educational Service Unit number 3 Administrator, and the Mayor of La Vista, Doug Kindig, in regards to coordinating some community action in regards to helping out with some of our behavioral and disability issues that we're showing within our communities. And they're very anxious to join in with other groups within the community in regards to programs to help those in need, and those are coming. I'd like to mention that I had the privilege of meeting with Mary Ann Marie Hartman at the Arts in Motion in regards to an orientation and a mission briefing in regards to where their organization is going. It's a very good organization, but like other organizations right now, they are, if you will, seeking funds. They're making do with what they have and trying to grow. So thank you very much. Had a meeting with the NASB president, John Spatz, and Matt Belka in regards to some, if you will, legislative issues that they wanted to discuss. So thank you very much, John and Matt. Attended the Omaha Education Association winter reception. Local politicians and other school board members were there, if you will, sharing ideas and exchanging thoughts, swapping stories. So it was very beneficial. And met with Senator Burke Harr in regards to, he's very, very anxious and excited about expanding career education opportunities in the near future. He'd like to have that as one of the priorities that we have. And lastly, I was contacted by Dr. Mike McGinnis he's the CEO, the new CEO of Goodwill Incorporated here, and he would like to meet up in the very near future to discuss vocational rehab opportunities with Mark Schultz. So we're looking forward to meeting with Dr. McGinnis in regards to that. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. The requested travel from board members are now linked in your Sparc meetings. At this time, the following board members have requested attendance at the following events. You have those on your Sparc. At this time, if you would like to attend an event, please, after the meeting, let Ryan, Denise, or Laura know of your desires.
Should we wait till after the meeting, or should we get it approved now?
After the meeting, Patrick.
Wanting to add things to the current list?
Yes.
So you want to do that now?
We can do it afterwards.
No, there's an issue, I believe, with Accountability and Disclosure Commission, and that's the reason I asked the question.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, so if there are items that folks would like to add to the existing list, and we've updated that, so within Sparc, you have that current list available to you as well.
I would like to have my name added to the Student Mobility Workshop and the NSAB Legislative Issues Conference and the NRSCSA Legislative Forum in February. And I also intend to, I don't know whether it was on here or whether it was supposed to be on here, attend the convocation that the commissioner is doing in South Sioux City next Friday, I believe. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other additions?
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
just
Rachel.
double checking and I'm not seeing it because I know I did send in an email that I would be attending in South Sioux City next week, and maybe I'm missing it. But I did request to attend South Sioux City Thursday, January 11th.
Got it.
Yeah,
I have a question. I would like to attend in South Sioux City only if I could ride along with someone else, so there isn't a mileage kind of thing. Are you going, John?
we'll talk about it.
Okay, all right. I don't know. I just won't add my
I
name.
understand.
If I may,
What's that?
if I may, Lisa, if you're wanting to go, put your name on. If you don't go, it's fine.
Oh, okay. I won't be causing a problem. Okay,
Lisa, we'll go ahead. I'll put my name down. We'll go together.
okay.
2.2.
You bet.
Patsy, you're going also. Did I hear that?
Yes, I called that in already.
Okay.
yeah.
And carpools can occur in Oakland, on North, just saying.
Come on up and I'll get you there. I might surprise you at your doorstep. That would be lovely.
With 4 or few members in the car, please.
Are there any other submissions?
President Witzel, to confirm, for the South Sioux event, we have Patrick McPherson, Rachel Wise, Lisa Fricky, John Witzel, Patsy Co-Johns.
Did we miss anybody? Apparently not, Ryan. Thank you.
And the motion should be to approve the travel as amended.
I need a motion to approve the travel as amended.
I so move.
Second.
Oh, wait, can I do that when I'm on the list?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Witzel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
O'Halloran, Co-Johns,
Yes.
Fricky,
Yes.
Nichols, McPherson,
Abstain.
Wise.
Yes.
We have 6 yes, 1 abstain, 1 absent.
Motion passes. Thank you.
So I just want to explain one thing, and one of the, and maybe I'll have Scott Summers come up. In response, we've done some work with the accountability and disclosure, ensuring that our processes meet with their current guidance. And I think in this case, if we have something that's already, that you've traveled to and we're approving a past travel, but we've not, pre-approvals are fine. You can all vote on pre-approvals. And we're probably in a gray area relative to whether or not there's a need to abstain for something that's already happened. I will explain that a little bit of the, and Scott, please correct me if I'm wrong, but a little bit of this actually dealt with other boards that were actually approving checks that were going to them specifically. Since that is not what happens at a state board level, you're not approving a particular check. It's only the fact that we have lots of other checks and balances, I guess, in that process that I think we're actually fine. But if you want to be absolutely clear, you can actually abstain from a vote where you've already been to. Pre-approval is always fine. So that's probably clear as mud now, as my lawyers talk instead of me, I guess. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate it, sir. Thank you. The next items are information items and written reports for the board and for our information only. Before we adjourn, I'd like to also thank Patricia Tim here for her past year of leadership. It's been an exceptional year for Patricia and this board. In regards to one thing about the board which is unique is we always come together, and most of the time we come to a consensus. We all are in line. So Patricia, thank you for your leadership, and we'll carry on accordingly. Thank you. The work session will be held on Thursday, February 1 at 2 p.m. and the board meeting held on Friday, February 2nd at 9 a.m. in this room. Thank you for your attending, and for those who tuned in to the broadcast today, the January State Board meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.